What it was like at the beginning, I'm scared to death, I tell you. Going over the beach, knowing somebody was going to be shooting at you. It was scary going over the beach, but it was like, it got to be probably routine afterwards. It was, this is our job. This is what we need to do. We're going to support our troops that are on the ground and the South Vietnamese Army that's on the ground. We're going to do what we can for them. And that was day in and day out.
Hello and welcome to the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I am your host, Vincent Ailo, call sign Jello, and joining me today in the Circle Air Group studios here at Gillespie Field in San Diego is Mr. John Koch. Shylock, right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
I guess I should call it the Attack Pilot Podcast for today, maybe.
That's affirmative.
Oh, fantastic. Well, it's good to have you. You are in town because what? The A-6 Intruder Association is meeting. Is that right?
We're having our semi-annual get-together. We do it on the West Coast and alternate to the East Coast.
Okay.
This year, we happen to be here in San Diego again.
Yeah, well, here we are in April, and I think probably 3 or 4 months ago, Warren Eastman, who I think is involved, is the vice president of the Distinguished Flying Cross Association, I think, said, "Hey, Vincent, you got to get this guy on your show." And then he sent me all this stuff that apparently you had sent him. I need to cite some of this because Shylock's grandpa was a gunner's mate on a submarine during World War I. His father was a gunner's mate on a destroyer during World War II and got a Purple Heart for being injured during a kamikaze attack, I understand, in the Pacific. And then he flew 250 combat missions during Vietnam as an A-6 Intruder bombardier navigator, BN, as a nugget, which for those who don't know is your first cruise right out of flight training, your first deployment, bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the infamous Than Hoa Bridge, Kep Airfield along the Chinese border. That must have been later, I think. And then you observed a B-52 get hit by a SAM during Linebacker II as well. So it sounds like you did a lot in a little bit of time.
Dave and I flew quite a few missions in Vietnam during our time there.
Okay, who was Dave?
Dave was my pilot, call sign Snake.
All right.
And we got together and we flew 300 and some times off that carrier, over 200 combat missions during that time frame.
Wow. Well, normally, Shylock, I would start with what got you interested in the Navy or naval aviation, but I think I know with that pedigree. But let's go back to the beginning. Where are you from, and was service just sort of expected in the Koch household, or?
Well, I think it was sort of expected. I grew up in Minnesota, moved around the country for a while, and when I was in Minnesota, my dad got transferred over to North Dakota, and I met the mayor of our town, who happened to be a colonel in the Army, Corps of Engineers, and they got me interested in going to college. And I ended up getting an appointment to West Point.
Okay.
I was the oldest of 9, so I took that right away because I knew I was going to have to work my way through college, and I ended up being the 4th alternate on that, and I ended up in West Point in July of 1956, I think. Wow. It was.
I'm racking my brain to see if we've had another guest on this show who's been to West Point. I can't come up with one, but maybe there's one I'm forgetting. How did it go for you?
It went real well during the summer, during the plebe summer, which was absolutely trying. I mean, you were awake 6 o'clock in the morning, and you didn't get to bed until after 10 o'clock at night, plus everything that you ended up doing, the regime that they had going for us. The first semester in West Point, I failed the English final exam. I passed the course, but I failed the English final exam. So I was asked to leave.
Really?
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Your participation is no longer necessary.
No longer needed. So I was in.
Oh, wow.
I was then transferred to a reserve unit, and I went back home. And my folks were living in Marietta, Ohio at the time, and I went back there and got into college and in the reserve unit. You know, I was a young whippersnapper right out of West Point. and had old reserve guys, and they were still using the old M1 carbine was their weapon. And they were getting...
For like drill or for
Yeah,
actual?
well, actual.
Yeah, okay.
But they were getting M14s. And nobody knew what an M14 was. Well, being from the academy, I could field strip one blindfolded. So I ended up being really the instructor for the entire engineering battalion.
You made lemonade out of your lemons coming out of West Point.
Coming out of West Point.
And this is, I guess I might have missed it, this is in the ROTC now, or was just...
I was in the regular Army.
In the Army? Oh, okay.
Oh, I was part of the Army.
But going to school on the side?
I was going to college.
Okay.
As a reservist.
Okay.
I had to spend 4 years in a reserve unit as part of my obligation.
Because you'd started off over there. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. All right.
And the first sergeant and I didn't get along too well because I was young and he was old.
I've seen a pattern here, John.
And our engineering battalion, we were being told that we were going to go active. I remember walking up to the first sergeant and says, I'm not going active. He says, I'm going to complete my college. And he said, son, you're going with us. So I went back to school, and in front of the student union, I saw this white van with gold wings on it. And I walked into the van and I said, here's my situation. I want to complete my college. If I sign on the dotted line, will I get to complete college? And they said, absolutely. That's the program that you're in. Naval Reserve Officer candidate. So I signed on the dotted line. And 2 weeks later, I was at Andrews Air Force Base taking a physical.
Navy saves the day, huh?
Navy saved the day, and I was able to complete my school.
Okay. What college?
This is Marietta College.
Okay.
I was a sophomore in Marietta College. I knew I wanted to get my engineering degree. That was my goal from day one.
All right.
And so I transferred to Indiana Institute of Technology in Fort Wayne, Indiana. 1,200 students in the entire school.
But they still had an ROTC?
No, they didn't have an ROTC. See, signing up with the Navy, my commitment then was just 8 weeks every summer.
Oh.
And I went to Pensacola.
That almost sounds like Avrock, or maybe not Avrock.
It is. It was the Avrock program.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Because the Marines still have something like that with the platoon leaders class, I think it is. But I was a signature away from doing that before I ended up in the ROTC. Do you end up getting an engineering degree?
Yes, I ended up getting a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering.
Okay. And then the Navy said, all right, time for you to serve?
Time for me to come aboard. So I ended up reporting to Pensacola, Florida on Veterans Day of 1968.
Wow. Well, but hold on. Pensacola is where aviation takes place. That hasn't really come up yet. Your dad and grandfather were both gunner's mates. Was aviation an interest to you at some point?
Not at all. Well, the reserve unit the Army Reserve unit I was in, was getting called up to the Bay of Pigs.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I'm not going.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got into college, of course, Vietnam had just started. And I said, I'm not going to be on the ground. And that's why I chose the aviation. Aviation.
Well, as some of the guests on this show have mentioned before, it wasn't all that much better in the air for some of those crews over there. But at any rate, all right, so you head down to Pensacola, a bit warmer than the places you're used to, it sounds like, all the places you mentioned. Was a pilot an option, or did you have something happening that kept you in a naval flight officer? Or?
In the naval flight officer, because of the stigmatism, I had my left eye.
Okay.
I could not pass the initial pilot exam.
Yeah.
So I went to the route of being a naval flight officer.
And was there a particular platform you were hoping for, or just kind of take it day by day, getting through the training?
I was just taking it day by day. Our instructor down there in charge of us was an A3 NFO. And I thought A3s were nice, so I ended up graduating out of the class in Pensacola. I got jet school. I was one of the few that are able to get jet school. Mm-hmm. And so I went to Glencoe, Georgia for 4 grueling weeks.
Okay. To learn the A3 or?
Just to learn how to fly jets.
Oh, okay.
In other words, how to navigate
sure.
with the jet.
Faster speeds, lower altitudes, perhaps?
Right.
Okay.
Inertial navigation systems and dead reckoning systems and
Yeah, we take
else.
GPS for granted these days, but back then you had to really do some math.
We didn't have any GPS.
No, I know that, but the point is, right, you got to look where you are and calculate the wind and
Yes.
speed and heading and everything else.
And so I graduated from jet school, and I was in the A3 pipeline. I was to get my wings. I remember the CO coming down and said, I have a billet open in A6s. And he said, would you like it? I said, does it have an ejection seat? And he says, yes. And I said, I'll take it. I had no idea what an A6 was or what it did, but it had an ejection seat.
Well, by that point, had you learned enough or heard enough stories about the A3 or something? Because it had an interesting reputation. I don't want to disparage it, but so you decided something with the ability to get out quickly was?
Yes, was
prudent?
Was prudent.
Okay. So off you go to, I assume maybe back then they still called it the Replacement Air Group, the RAG.
Right,
These days they'd call it the Fleet Replacement Squadron. Where was that?
The RAG was in Whidbey Island, Washington, NAS Whidbey Island.
Okay.
I had never been west of the Mississippi.
Wow. But it was cold, so you had that going for you.
Yes. But a beautiful place. I'll never forget driving across Deception Pass, which from the mainland to the actual island, 150-foot Doug firs just lining the roads. It was breathtaking.
Yeah.
And then driving over the Deception Pass Bridge onto the island, which was 100 and some feet off the water.
Uh-huh.
And stories have been told that A6s have gone underneath that bridge.
Once, maybe, right?
A few times.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, for one pilot, he might get away with it once. Wow. So when you saw the A6, which, again, not to insult anyone else's pride and joy, but it's not arguably the most sexy airplane ever. But what did you think when you finally, or maybe by then you'd seen pictures and...
I hadn't seen one until I got to the island.
What did you think? It's like an arranged marriage. You get to see your bride. How was it?
Yeah, it was kind of an ugly-looking airplane.
Well, you're allowed to say it because you flew it. I was trying to be polite. All right.
It was a fantastic airplane to fly. Just absolutely fantastic. You know, where can you fly realistically at 100 feet forever? That was its capability and being able to handle the ordnance that we were able to take with us.
Okay. Now, what year are we talking now when you're getting to Whidbey Island?
June, July of 1969.
Oh, so the war is raging in Vietnam,
Yes.
And they're bringing folks in to get trained, probably without much delay, I would think. How was the training? Was it easy or not easy, but I mean, was it...
It was intense.
Intense?
Yeah.
But were you able to understand it? Were the concepts... I mean, right? Because there's new things that maybe you'd never done as far as the navigating and some of the different things. I mean, you'd done some, but...
With my engineering background, I worked my way through school doing surveying, so I was using geometry all the time and trigonometry. So, I mean, getting a chart and using a chart, that was easy. I mean, that was right up my alley. I didn't have any issue being able to do that.
Yeah.
But the training was intense. I mean, we had 30 in our RAG group, and there was a RAG class every other week.
Wow.
Pilots and, bombardier navigators.
Yeah. And you talked about being crewed with Dave later, jumping ahead. Or did you fly with an instructor pilot as a student NFO?
We did, but many different,
Iterations and different pilots?
Different pilots.
Yeah.
And the thing about that training up there, we had a TC-4 that we actually had 4 consoles in it for bombardier navigators and the pilots, where we could control the airplane. So we got to do the low level. We got to do, radar bombing. It was fun.
Yeah.
But it was intense.
Okay. So when you come out, do you feel ready, dare I say? Because, again, I've sort of hinted at the beginning. You're going to go right out of the frying pan into the fire. How are you feeling in February now of what, 70?
70.
Yeah.
The February 70, I remember, because we had some pilots in the RAG that were old A4 pilots transitioning into the A6. And the CO of the squadron happened to be one of those A4 pilots, and he was in the RAG with me. And he said, John, would you come on over and see me this afternoon? He said, the hangar's across the way from 128. He said, I have an office over there now. And he was going to be the skipper of the reformed VA-115 Arabs. And I walked over to the office and knocked on the door, and he said, "Come on in and sit down." He said, "How would you like to be part of this squadron?" Because I didn't have any orders yet. I had no idea where I was going to go.
Okay.
And he said, "Yeah, I'm forming a squadron." He says, "You're one of my picks." I said, "That'd be great, sir." He said, "I need a materiel officer." I said, "What's a materiel officer?" He says, "Oh, it's basically a supply officer for the squadron." I said, "I know absolutely nothing about the supply chain in the Navy." He said, "Oh, I got a first class downstairs that'll show you the ropes."
It wasn't really a question, was it?
No. So that's where I started in that squadron, basically rebuilding a decommissioned squadron that were flying SPADs.
Sure. Well, so that's why we've had an episode about VMFAT 101, the training squadron here at Miramar that is sundowned presently, but could come back, as we talked about with the two guests that day. Squadrons sometimes never really go away, right? They can be reformed in case of war or whatever else. And in fact, VFA 115 still exists, but they have a slightly different name these days and fly the F-18. But
yeah,
the name of the squadron was the Arabs?
Name of the squadron when we recommissioned it was the Arabs, and now it's the Eagles.
All right. I wonder if someone got their sensitivities in a bundle over that.
I think somebody got their sensitivities in a bundle over that.
Okay. All right. So you've got a gentleman who's asking for you by name, which is great. Didn't sound like you had to say yes. It just sounded like you were being told to say yes. But did he say anything about the deployment schedule? Because sometimes squadrons form up and go right away.
We were scheduled to deploy in 8 months with the Carrier Wing 5 assigned to the USS Midway. Well, the Midway was in dry dock at the time, getting retrofitted. It got delayed, so we were delayed in our deployment. So basically, I had a year at home flying the airplane, going to different areas and going to Fallon, Nevada, which was our heavy range for bombing over there, live bombing over there. Mm-hmm. It was enjoyable, and the squadron got to be real close. I mean, because we were together, we knew we were going to go eventually.
Yeah. All right, so you finally deploy aboard Midway in April of 71. Is that right?
Yes, April 71.
Okay.
That's what I remember.
All right. So now this is your nugget cruise, although you've been in the fleet for a year. And you do your carrier qualifications, presumably, and then start steaming west. What are they saying on the ship? I mean, we're going to go have a nice port visit in Hong Kong, or man, we're going to go straight to the zone?
Well, we were going to Hawaii and then directly to the Philippines. And then we were scheduled to go to Yankee Station and basically fly down South Vietnam area. But on the way from Alameda to Hawaii, we got in a heavy storm. It was a typhoon. Actually took one of the 5-inch main mounts on the USS Midway and rolled it right up into the side of the ship. So we were in port for an extended period. It was a couple weeks.
Okay.
We had fun,
Yes. Is this in the Philippines or in Hawaii?
It's in Hawaii.
Oh, okay. You can still have fun there, but I've heard you can have some real fun in the PI. All right, so it sets you back a little bit, but you finally get over there. Were there other carriers that were working or operating north of you, or was the Vietnam War not going north at that time?
We were not going north at that time. We were not going above the DMZ. So it was just 2 carriers down south when we were over there during the April cruise.
Well, I was barely a baby at this point, but I don't mean to minimize the risks, but was that somewhat a sigh of relief to be down south where the threats were less, I guess?
Well, threats were less than what we experienced the following year, but, to a Nugget crew, a Nugget squadron, they were still shooting at us.
They're still shooting.
They're still shooting at us. And most of the flights during the day, we'd meet up with a FAC, which, they could fly the small airplanes, the OV-10s and the OV-1s, and direct us to targets on the ground. But our deck was 5,000 feet during the daytime.
You're no lower than altitude?
We dropped our bombs above 5,000 feet.
And these are general purpose unguided bombs?
Yeah, there was no such thing as a laser guided bomb during my time period.
Sometimes I have to remind myself and other people. So how good are your hits, dare I say?
Well, my pilot was pretty good. He would drop a bomb within a 100-foot circle. So, I mean, he was really good.
Visually or based on a cue that you're providing him as the BA?
No, visually.
Wow.
Visually. Okay. Visual bombing. His visual bombing got better the second cruise. We can get a 75-foot circle.
All right.
But to kill a tank, we needed a 50-foot circle. That's why we dropped multiple bombs.
In a string.
In a string,
yeah. Okay. And I've already alluded to it, but some of the targets, some, I guess, maybe satisfactory, if you will, as far as for what you're doing, but some maybe just, we think there's something there and it turns out there's not?
That's right. During the daytime, 90%, I'd say 99% of our flights, we were directed by a forward air controller, and we were dropping on what he saw on the ground. Very rarely did we see anything on the ground. I mean, we might see the reflection of a truck or a truck convoy, and he'd direct us in and shoot rockets, and we'd just hit on his smoke. At nighttime, we were looking for movers. And the A-6 had the capability, if the track radar was up, had the capability to recognize a moving target. They'd show up like a marshmallow. And we would then drop with our inertial navigation system and our computer and our radar on these moving targets.
And it wasn't just because it was moving that made it hostile. Was it in a certain area? I mean, obviously you had rules of engagement or, special instructions, spins, we'd call it, and different things. But how did you know based on location or what else?
Based upon location, Bangkarai Pass, you read about that. That was a choke point along the Ho Chi Minh Trail that we would take a lot of look at and bomb that particular area looking for movers. And at night, that's really the only way we could see them if they were moving. Very rarely would we see any headlights. We saw headlights, then that was fair game. Yeah, we had certain areas that we could go into in South Vietnam. And if we didn't have any targets, we had secondary backups that we would drop our bombs on our inertial navigation system. But the A-6 was the most sophisticated aircraft for bombing at that time. Mm-hmm. There wasn't anything that the Navy had that could fly at night and was all weather.
Yeah. It sounds like Dave did a good job with it. What was the ordnance you were carrying at that time?
500-pound bombs.
With conical fins or retarding fins? Or
very rarely did we go with conical fins because, again, we knew that there were missile sites down there. There was AAA sites down there along the Bangkarai Pass, Magia Pass. Very hilly, very a lot of karst hills. And so we wanted to stay above those. We didn't want to buy the farm. So we stayed above those, and very rarely did we have conical fins on us. Most of the time, it's just straight hard-nosed bombs.
Okay. But did you have an opportunity to open up like a retarding fin, or was it mostly just, in other words, if you're up at 5,000 feet, you don't need the Mark 15 Snake Eye, for example, to open up and slow it down?
No. Our standard load was not to have the snake eyes because we could carry more without the snake eyes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow, interesting. Do you remember the very first mission? I mean, I would think you would, but maybe the second or third was more memorable for some reason. But what was it like at the beginning? Let's put it that way.
What it was like at the beginning? I'm scared to death, I'll tell you. Going over the beach, knowing somebody was going to be shooting at you. It was scary going over the beach. But it was like, got to be probably routine afterwards. It was, this is our job. This is what we need to do. We're going to support our troops that are on the ground and the South Vietnamese army that's on the ground, and we're going to do what we can for them. And that was day in and day out.
You said you worked with forward air controllers, typically the airborne ones. Did you ever work with the troops on the ground directly to provide them close air support?
Yeah, close air support on the ground. We had one mission that we had, because we got assigned out of Thailand. We'd check in with the Air Force. There was a controller, and they'd hand us over to a controller on the ground or a forward air controller, a FAC as we call them. Mm-hmm. We had one on the ground, And I remember the one mission that we had. He says, "We got troops close by. I need some support." And that was the day that we broke our 5,000-foot ceiling. We went down looking for them to see where they were.
Yeah.
He didn't have any AAA in the area, he told us. He said, "The only thing I have is small arms." So we could be down at 2,000 feet and be pretty good. But we laid a string across some movement that he had on the ground, some heavy artillery. Remember doing that with that.
Did you ever think in that moment, this is the reason I'm up here, not down there? Because you said that earlier.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Every time I flew off that ship and flew over South Vietnam,
Yeah.
I came home at the end of the mission, there were 3 square meals there, and they were hot, and I had a nice warm
shower
bed.
and a
shower,
bed,
yeah.
and nobody's trying to sneak in and kill you in your
No.
sleep. Well, I mean, same reason I chose it years later, decades later. I said, well, I'd rather be up here where it's relatively safe. Not safe, but how did that first deployment go as far as, again, I don't want to call it milk runs, but it sounds like it was relatively safe. But did you have anyone in your air wing have any trouble with threats or?
Not that I remember. I don't
Okay.
remember. I know the ship, what I remember, I know the squadron didn't lose any airplanes.
All right.
And I don't remember any of the other squadrons losing any airplanes because we didn't have any SAR missions that I remember.
Okay. And so how long did that first deployment last?
That first deployment, it lasted until November.
From April?
Yeah, April
So,
and November.
Yeah, about 7 months.
7 months.
By the end, did you, I would think, feel pretty proficient? You weren't a nugget anymore?
No, I felt it was routine. We knew everything in the airplane. I knew the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
I knew each one of the different airplanes in the squadron because each one was different. The control system in it was different. The way it handled was different, slightly.
Right.
I mean, they're all the same, but each one of them had their own idiosyncrasies.
Sure. Like twins or triplets, they
Yeah.
can each be a little bit different, even though there's so much identical. Normally, John, when you go on a combat deployment and then you come home, you need some time to decompress. And typically, like, for example, between my first deployment and second, it was 18 months, I want to say. Was that the case in the early 70s? Did you come home and have some downtime?
That was not the case with VA-115. We had downtime from when we came home. We had 3 or 4 weeks that we could take leave if we wanted to. It was kind of downtime in the
Right around the
squadron.
holidays anyway.
Yeah, it was over the holidays.
Mhm.
But then after the holidays, we started to gear up again, get ready for combat. And we went to Fallon, do our live ordnance bombing. And we came back from that, and the skipper came and said, "We're going to go down and do care quals." And we said, "Okay, that'll be nice." The week before we were scheduled to do that in March, the rumor was, "You better pack everything because we may not come back."
Goodness. What ship was this on?
The Midway again.
Okay.
It was on the Midway again. So we went down to Alameda and did our care quals, and I packed what I needed. I didn't pack my blues. I said, "The hell with the blues. I'm not going to be wearing those." Maybe I'll take some whites with me, but that was it.
These are the uniforms
Yeah.
in case, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I had one set of whites, short sleeve whites that I
Right.
took with me, and that was it. And we got down there and did our care quals, and we all qualified. And the word came back, we're going to continue on to the Philippines. So Dave and I, there was 3 crews that flew an airplane off to Alameda so they could get more other airplanes on the ship, and we transpacked over to the Philippines.
So the Midway went without you, and then you ended up flying over with supportive tankers? Is that what you're saying?
We had an A3 that tanker
Wow.
with us.
Okay.
So there was 4 of us, and we flew from Alameda to Barbers Point,
Hawaii. Okay.
Hawaii. We ended up staying there 2 or 3 days. It was so warm that day, or the days we were scheduled to turn around and take off and continue on, it was too hot for us to take off. They didn't have enough runway. We had 5 drop tanks in our internal fuel, so we were at 55,000 pound gross weight.
So the performance was just insufficient.
We didn't have enough runway.
Sounds like another good time in Hawaii then,
Yeah,
just like the first
we
time.
had 3 or 4 days in Hawaii that we enjoyed ourselves. But I remember forgetting that last day when we did take off, we took as much runway as we could. We taxied right to the landing lights, fired it up, and took the entire 8,000 feet to get that airplane.
Because you don't have an afterburner in A6s. So.
No.
All right.
We could not land at Midway then because the Goonie birds were there.
At Midway Atoll.
Yeah, we could not land at the atoll to refuel.
Not the ship by the same name. Okay, really? Because it was what? The runway was?
The Goonie birds were nesting.
The actual birds?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think there's an airplane that's nicknamed that. It's like one of the ones that lands amphibian. But
yeah.
So even back then, we cared about nesting. That's good.
Yeah, we did.
So, but also you don't want to ingest them down your engines. Where did you end up going instead?
Well, we flew over Midway, but the Marines with the C-130s were able to take off. They met us overhead. The A-6s refueled from the Marine 130s.
Was that a first? Like, oh, we'll just make this work?
That was a first for us. We met them at 25,000 feet, and they pushed over.
To keep the speed up?
To keep their speed up, and we took as much gas until we fell out of the basket.
Like a fat tick.
Right.
And then where'd you go from there, though? That's a big ocean.
It was a big ocean. We landed at Wake.
Okay.
And there's nothing there but a runway. Literally, that island, there's nothing there but a runway.
Did they have to fly something in full of fuel then?
No, they had the fueling there,
Okay.
But I mean, it was just, that was out in the middle of...
No bar, no restaurant?
They had a BOQ, and we went down and got beer and sat on the beach.
Okay. Yeah, because you're right. You were in your mid-20s. Were you still single at the time?
No, I was married at the time.
Well, we'll leave that part. Anyway, all right. So Wake Island, I've seen it from the air when I was flying from Honolulu to Japan in my airline capacity. Where do you go from Wake then?
We went from Wake to Guam, and that place was hotter than a pistol. And Dave and I said, we're not going to stay here. We're going to hot refuel. It was an Air Force base, Anderson Air Force Base. So we hot refueled there. That was the first time we had hot refuel.
Just pull into the pits, pump you up while you're still,
it's still turning.
Yeah.
Yeah, still turning.
Okay. And then?
We went from Guam, we ended up in the Philippines. Went up to QB Point.
But where's the ship Midway all this time? Is it already ahead of you or behind you? Or?
It's behind us. It was a day behind us. We got there a day or two before the ship
okay.
did.
So you can sit in the PI and wait on it?
Yeah.
Of all these flights, what was the longest?
The one from Alameda to Barbers.
How long was that? Or hours anyway, if you remember.
I want to say it was 5+ hours.
Okay. Long enough for your rear end to be ready
Oh,
to...
yeah. I mean, it was not flying the airliner. We didn't have cushy seats or
Right,
anything else.
yeah.
It was just a hard pan.
But, I mean, right, you're not as lonely with someone sitting next to you, maybe. I don't know. Can you share snacks and stories or jokes? I mean, there's some camaraderie, I feel like, at least.
Oh, yeah, we took our mask off and we were talking to each other.
Yeah.
And, we took a box lunch with us.
All right. So how does the second deployment compare to the first? I think from what I saw in your notes, it got ratcheted up a little bit. Because this is 72.
Yes. It got ratcheted up extremely high.
Okay.
The first line period that we had, we were down in South Vietnam again, just to get everybody used to the combat zone. But then after that, we went into North Vietnam. And we flew noon to midnight or midnight to noon, depending on which cycle we were on. And there was 2 or 3 carriers at the beginning. And at night, we'd take off. We'd had certain targets that we were assigned. And depending on where we were, Dave and I would go in a lot of times between 100 and 500 feet, just to mask ourselves from the radars that the North Vietnamese had.
Yeah. John, people often ask me how realistic is Top Gun or Top Gun Maverick. For the A-6, I guess I have to ask you, and forgive me, but right, Flight of the Intruder. In fact, we've had Stephen Kuntz on the show talking about the A-6. But, the way it's depicted, much later, of course, but any accuracy or truth to that? I mean, they show them going in low altitude, very fast, all alone. Is that the kind of mission, or was that Hollywood?
No, that's not Hollywood. Flight of the Intruder is almost true to life except for the last 5 minutes. Last 5 minutes Hollywood. But
Okay.
everything else on the Flight of the Intruder, very realistic. We did not go in at night as 2 or 3 planes. It was all single plane. That was our squadron.
Is that because it would have probably been very difficult to fly in formation without, like, I had night vision goggles later when I was doing mission. We weren't that low, but we would do night missions, and with goggles, it makes everything relatively easier. But I mean, it would have been a big risk, I think, to put a bunch of airplanes together at that low altitude and high speeds.
It is. We didn't have night vision goggles.
No, I know.
All we had was our inertial navigation system, our search radar. That's all we had. And so it was all single plane. We knew where everybody was going. There was typically 4 planes each launch, each cycle. But we had individual targets. I can't remember a night mission where we had more than a single plane. And we were assigned hard targets and soft targets.
30 years later, it sounds like the F-117 was doing something very similar, but probably from a higher altitude. And is that, again, the movie talks about, hey, we're going feet dry, happy hunting, see you later, and then you're just kind of alone and unafraid for however long the mission takes?
Yeah, anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes over the North Vietnamese area.
Mm-hmm.
And you call in Red Crown, which is the North Destroyer, say, we're feet dry. And we literally turned everything off on that airplane. We went communication, the radio went on standby, all the FIS, where they could track us. That all went to standby. The track radar was off. The search radar I had on all the time, just to see where we were going. But we tried to get as clean as we could. So North Vietnamese couldn't follow us.
Yeah.
But we found out they were picking us up as we got off the ship with their search radar. They knew how many airplanes were coming.
Oh, yeah.
And towards the end of the war, they had their search radar on all the time, but the fire control radar for their missiles, the SA-2s, they didn't turn those on until you were within range of them. They were just handing, and we could see what was happening.
Lying in wait?
Basically, lying in wait, yeah.
Huh.
They let Dave and I into some really difficult, hard targets up close to the Chinese border north of Haiphong and Hanoi. We got in there unscathed until we started to make our run, and literally all hell broke loose.
Did they, you think, have either good guesses or intel or something telling them where you're most likely headed?
Well, they had the search radars that were monitoring us.
Right.
And that's a lot of times why we got down to the 100 feet. So we would be masked with the land, and they couldn't find us.
Of course, if you're flying up the harbor, you're kind of exposed a little bit there.
You are. You're exposed against the mountains and against the harbor.
Was there one mission where you did some mining? I guess this was after that was permitted, obviously, but...
Oh, yeah. I got some pictures of that here.
Can you? Yeah, show us.
Yeah, here's the picture of us going into the harbor at Vinh. That's flying at 100 feet, and we had 1,000-pound mines on us.
In other words, you're in this mission, and you said, hold on, Dave, and you pull out your camera and snap it quick.
I had a camera ready most of the time, sitting up on the wings. You can see this is the refueling probe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's because it's fixed on the nose. It's always
fixed
there.
on the nose. That's a refueling probe. Well, I had a camera just sitting there, and as I'm working the ordnance, I got my one hand just doing this to the camera, punching the...
Okay.
It's not like the automatic ones we have today.
Yeah.
It was a manual 35 millimeter
Take
camera.
what you can get.
Yeah.
Isn't 100 feet in the daytime, though? I mean, that's got to be quite a bit more risk because now they don't just hear you once you're gone. They could theoretically see you coming.
They could see us coming. That was a risk going into the Vinh Harbor. But we got off the ship, and there was 2 of us. And we knew the area. We'd been there before on other missions at higher altitude. So we picked our run in, and we went right down the middle of the river and laid the 1,000-pound mines into the river. They may have seen us, but they probably heard us on the way out because we were going so fast.
Yeah. We haven't talked about mining yet on this show, and we don't necessarily need to spend a bunch of time on it, but if they see you plopping things in the water that aren't going boom right now, that can almost still have its desired effect, because now they know, our river's mined and maybe we don't go anywhere, which could accomplish the mission.
Well, this other one, that's a Chinese ship.
Okay.
That was off limits. Again, they had a 5-mile radius around that crazy thing where we weren't supposed to go anywhere near it. But Dave and I got clearance one day, and this was right off the Vin Harbor too. So they were offloading the freighter and taking stuff into the Vin Harbor and on up into North Vietnam. But Dave and I got clearance one day. Their intelligence folks wanted to see that ship. So we made a low pass. We had a clearance to make a low pass.
Well, it's sitting there at anchor. Is this the same camera? You just now?
No, that's the same camera.
Okay.
That I had.
Yeah.
So Air Intelligence got more information about that ship that was out there in the water.
Well, if you can't get close to it, but if you mine the river I don't know if it was all the way up in that river, but I guess do we have back channels telling them, hey, don't go there because...
That ship was anchored off the mouth of the river.
Okay.
It did not go in, but they were ferrying smaller, sampans and in-type boats in there.
Yeah, it's funny. While we're looking at pictures, what else do you have?
That one there is the Vin Airfield.
Okay, looks like there's a detonation occurring or just occurred.
That was one of our pictures of one of the wingmen had just gone in front of us and exploded the 500-pound bombs. But you can see the different revetments that they had the MiG sitting in on the runway.
Well, and you can see what looks like craters on the moon as well.
Oh, yeah, there's North Vietnamese. After we got done, it was cratered, completely cratered.
For a day or two, and then they had everyone filling them in?
They had everyone filling them in. That was a crazy thing about bombing river fords up there, is they would fill them in that next morning.
Wow. Did you ever get any feedback on the mines you dropped, for example? Like when I was a F-18 pilot, we did mine exercises, and they'd put tags on our practice mines. And then apparently after we did our run, they'd have divers go down and score how close you got to where you were intended to be. But I'm not assuming anyone went diving on yours. I certainly wouldn't want to. But did you ever hear one way or the other, oh, they didn't go through, or there was a detonation or anything?
No, we didn't. We weren't getting that type of intelligence back.
Yeah.
That was, above our pay grade.
Well, and I think here we are in 2024 with every imaginable piece of information just about, at our fingertips in our back pockets. And back then, it wasn't the case. You did things both militarily and personally, and it wasn't everywhere like it is now.
No, I mean, the information we got back on basically our BDA, bomb damage assessment, was photographic. When an F-8 would go in there and take the photos.
Yeah.
We didn't have any satellites. We didn't have any GPS.
Pocket cell phones and everything, et cetera.
No.
Okay. The mining mission was one. You talked about some of your Flight of the Intruder-esque night solo missions. What about with Linebacker II? And again, I alluded to at the beginning, one of the things you share with people, and I was able to receive before we sat down, was that you had witnessed something. And I don't know if it was opening night, but just tell us how that all goes down. And maybe even a little bit of, like, did they call all the aircrew together and say, hey, guess what? We're finally taking the gloves off. Or so I don't know where you want to start, but.
They did. We were flying up north in different areas, but Haiphong and Hanoi were off limits. I mean, there was a 10-mile circle around both of those cities. They were off limits. We could not fly in there. We could not fly into the Haiphong Harbor and do anything. Dave and I had skirt the Haiphong, Hanoi area along the Karst Hills just so they couldn't see us. But we got the word mid-December, the gloves are off. The first thing we're going to do is mine Haiphong Harbor. And it was like the mines that the Navy had were like 55, they looked like 55-gallon gas cans. I mean, that's what they were. Every airplane on that ship that could fly was assigned to carry a mine. And Dave and I did not get assigned to mine. We were assigned a hot standby on the deck, and I had to know every other A-6 that was there where they were going in case one went down.
Because you could fill in for them.
I could fill in.
So you had to know everybody's.
Dave and I sat there on the deck until they said, we're off target. But one thing the XO promised us, he said, you will be on the first night mission.
That night?
That night.
Okay.
We mine during the day, and then that night, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was, dark. And Dave and I were assigned a mission in power plant deep in Haiphong. And so we had snake eyes that night. We knew we were going in at 100 feet. And we had our route set up. Everybody planned. So we had 4 airplanes on that launch. We knew where everybody was going. And Dave and I were one of the first 2 that went into that 10-mile circle of Haiphong. And on the run-in, I remember seeing a missile launch and then an explosion in the air. And Dave said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah." But we proceeded. We just put that in the back of our mind. I mean, that's literally what happened. It was an event that we had a job to do. We proceeded on to the power plant and dropped our, I think it was 22 500-pound bombs on that power plant. Wow. And coming back, I remember going to Air Intelligence and asking them, I said, what else was up there? We weren't told that the B-52s were coming in. We just knew what Navy planes. It was only the A-6s. Nobody else flew, but it was just the A-6s. And then we asked AI, what's going on? And the B-52s were there.
So you can see this even with unaided, as we'd call it, not night vision goggles, but just because an SA-2 guideline is as big as a flying telephone pole, they say. So you see this space shuttle basically launch, and then what? You just kind of follow it up, and then there's a big explosion?
Yeah.
At that point, was the explosion such that you could kind of see that it hit an airplane, or how did you?
We knew it hit something.
Okay.
I mean, it was that, because it hit, and it was like pieces of flame were falling down. So we knew an airplane got hit.
Yeah.
We knew an airplane got hit.
You can still feel it 50 years later, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you ever find out about the crew?
We didn't know anything about the crew until I got a call, and we started talking about that mission, and one of the board members, the DFC Society, was on that mission.
Oh, wow. On that plane?
On that plane.
Oh, okay. Well, so
and I haven't talked to him. Just thankful that he's alive.
Wow. I mean, it's serious business. There's no doubt about it. John, was there an occasion where, again, those red rings that you weren't allowed to fly, at some point, a lot of our prisoners were being held. They said, hey, we want you to go deliberately fly and let them know you're here. Were you involved in something like that as well?
I was. And the story behind that is we had the admiral aboard the Midway, and Dave and I were asked one evening to go have dinner with the admiral in the admiral's quarters. He said, sure. We didn't care. What are they going to do? Send us to Vietnam? We're already here,
Shave your heads.
Yeah. So we went up there, and we politely told him what we thought of his war and the silly targets, the river fords, truck parks that we were bombing. I mean, it's like, this is crazy. And he said, okay, thank you, boys. And we went down, and probably it must have been 2 or 3 weeks later, we got our ops officer called us up, and he said, I just got clearance to fly downtown Hanoi over the Hanoi Hilton. And this was October of 72. He said, you want to be part of that? And Dave and I said, oh, yeah, we want to be part of that. So we got loaded up. Dave and I got loaded up with I want to say we had just had regular 500 pounders, and Ken and CJ had snake eyes. They were going
the other
in,
plane?
yeah, they were going low level. And so what we did, we planned the mission to come in from the south of Hanoi. And Dave and I had found a missile storage site up there, south of Hanoi. We just happened on it one day and just looking, and we saw these lights, and we went down there and took a look at it and said, this is a missile storage site. We didn't have any bombs with us. So we came back to AI and reported that. So was our assigned secondary target. But we came off the ship, formed up as one airplane. I mean, we formed up under each other and then came up so that the search radars could see us. We went feet dry together, and we dropped down behind the karst hills, and we kissed Ken and CJ off. We popped up so that the search radars could still see us.
Ah.
We started making a run into our target and started getting painted with AAA and the Fansong SAM radar. We broke it off and came back out, but our signal to each other was a double click over the mic. When they're on their inbound, we would do our inbound. I think Dave and I did that 3 times, and the final time we heard the click from Ken and CJ that they were making the final run over downtown Hanoi. We made our run into the missile storage site. And as soon as we did that, all hell broke loose. They threw everything up at us. I remember yelling at Dave, his I bet it was a 6 or 7G hard left turn. And I yelled at him, go lower.
How low are you?
When we came out, when we debriefed, Dave said we were at 10 feet over the water. He said the radar altimeter registered 10 feet. I could see in front of me 5 miles, which, is just a few seconds, flying at 520 knots.
Mm-hmm.
But we had been just absolutely, it looked like the world had, looked like the 4th of July. We were flying through the middle of the 4th of July.
You had said earlier, except for the last few minutes, the Flight of the Intruder movie was accurate. I'm beginning to believe you because, right, isn't that sort of the premise is they take it upon themselves to go do that, but missile storage and downtown and all that. But I want to specifically ask, was there an element to that? And maybe I misunderstood what I read in advance of our discussion, but was there an element of that, like, we want to go tell the boys we're here, like, let them hear us?
That's absolutely.
Yeah,
Was that
mission?
That was that mission.
Okay.
That was the reason that Dave and I said we would go with the ops officer.
Okay.
We want to know the POWs that they are not forgotten.
And I don't want to jump over, again, you had a moment, I think, sounds like, where you got to see some of them in February and March. But did you ever later, just skipping ahead, get feedback that they heard you?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm going to say it was probably, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, we had some of the POWs come up to NAS Whidbey Island. And I lived at the time probably 10 miles. So we went over to Naval Association meeting, luncheon, dinner. And at the bar, I got to ask one of them, and I said, did you hear in March of 72 an airplane come over the Hilton? And they said, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and if I said February and March, we're a year off still, right? They don't come home until 73.
73, right.
Yeah, but
we were in October 72. And Linebacker II is Christmas of 72.
Okay, and then they're home by
home by February. They're starting to come home in February.
Okay. You brought a chart in as well. Was that from this period, or what are we looking at here?
This is from my period down South Vietnam.
Okay.
This is
first deployment?
Yeah, this is the navigation system that we had. I mean, had the charts.
Yeah. Not like what we have today, although we still have this, but
yeah,
a lot of it's on board. Oh, dear.
But that one's got Ben Cry Pass on it, and right here, and McGee Pass is right here.
Wow.
And all these different numbers on here I have is basically the aim points I would put into our computer. So at night, I could pick out the pass. I can see if there's any movers.
right? Because your head's down and doing what you need to do. And you can see based on the return of your system, hey, that looks like what I expect it to look like based on the chart.
Right.
Okay. And then there's cues going to the pilot.
Yeah, he's got a little VDI. It's about the size of a screen in my Avalon. It's about as big as his screen was. That he's taken all his input off of it. And I'm giving him target information from my computer.
Okay. So he's flying off of that because if he looks out the window, it's just black anyway.
It's just black anyway.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, sort of.
Depends.
Sort of, kind of.
Yeah.
He would fly on that system, and we would look for movers. And if we would see movers down on the ground visually, we'd go visual.
Even at night. Wow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When we flew into North Vietnam, I would get him the target on my system. But if he could see it visually on the bomb site, the red pipper on the bomb site, he took it over.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of times we bombed on the system, but like when we went up to Kep, it was all visual. We could see the runway.
Yeah. How accurate was it if you just bombed off the system? Of course, you're low, so that helps, but...
Maybe 100 foot.
For a single, if you just dropped one in
just
training?
drop one bomb.
Yeah.
Okay. But we'd drop a string of 14 to 22, depending on our bomb load.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Did the aircraft lurch when you did that? I have to think. It's a big airplane, too, but, I mean, that's a lot of, what'd you say? So 7,000 to 11,000 pounds of bombs falling off.
It moves. You can feel them coming off. Off. But I'll never forget the one that I really, really noticed it coming off is the trip we made up to Kep Air Force Base. It was way north of Hanoi, Haiphong. It was within 10 miles of the Chinese border. And the reason we were up there is the F-111s were down at the time. The Air Force 111s normally pick up that area.
Okay.
But they were down. And that was one of those runs where Dave and I were loaded with 14 500-pounders with snake eyes on it because we knew we were going to be low. They let us in. A few pot shots with some 23 millimeter anti-aircraft. But as soon as we started to make that run down the middle of that runway, all hell broke loose. Literally, we had 4 missiles fired at us.
This is at night?
This is at night.
So you're low enough that I'm guessing these things are trying to kind of maybe get down to you, but are you safe low?
No. They're coming at us.
Yeah? Ouch.
They're coming at us. And I wouldn't be here today if that fourth one hadn't blown up, hadn't detonated as it was off the launcher.
Oh, wow.
And Dave, he's excellent, absolute. I consider him the best A-6 pilot in the fleet, but we fought those 3 missiles coming at us.
Before or after or during the bomb run?
It was before the bomb run.
Wow. So you're heavy.
We were heavy. We had some altitude. I mean, as we saw them, we were coming up because we had to come over a karst ridge that we needed to get into that area. But we saw the missiles lift off. And when they do that, you put them right on your nose. That's the goal, is to put that SAM right smack on your nose and wait till he's close enough to you that he can't follow you, and you pull a 6G turn, 7G turn, and go down, convert altitude to airspeed, and let him go over the top of you. The last one, I don't know how we survived, just because we were low and we didn't have a lot of airspeed. But we were able to take him down low with us.
How many SAMs do you think in total were fired either at you or enough that were a threat? I mean, that sounds, there was 3 in one mission. I mean,
yeah.
Did you ever stop and think about how many? I mean, dozens or just a few or?
Boy, I
you don't want to think about it?
No, it's.
All right, here's a better one. How many bombs do you figure you dropped total? Because you did 250 missions?
Yeah, round numbers 250.
So,
and we were loaded anywhere from 14 to 22 500-pound bombs.
So 3,000 or 4,000?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the other one that we'd like to have is what they call a rockeye. It was a fragmentation bomb. It can go through, I want to say it was 6 inches of cold rolled steel. They'd go through. It was like a lawn, like when you were a kid, a lawn dart. That's what they looked like.
But the rockeye itself was a canister that opened,
canister.
Right? And then inside were these little death
bomblets.
devices,
Yeah.
And they could really do some damage.
Do some tremendous damage on it. That was the last mission that Dave and I had downtown Hanoi. We had those.
Really?
Targeting during that time, I think, was crazy. We were assigned missile suppression going in Linebacker II. There was a missile site, supposed missile site, right off the harbor. And we were assigned to take that out. Well, if you've read the stories about the missiles in North Vietnam, they were on mobile units. They were moving them around the country all the time. Dave and I said, okay, there was 4 airplanes scheduled for that launch. The XO happened to be on the launch with us, and he called us up on squadron frequency, and he says, my airplane just went down. He said, I'm not going to be able to launch with you guys. And we said, okay, and Dave and I looked at each other. And he said, Shylock, you got the target? I said, yes, sir. We took the Rockeyes to another power plant in downtown Haiphong. And we got the BDA back from them. You can see these what they looked like was pinholes through the roof. But every window, every door, sides of the building were completely gone when the F-8 came back the next day. They were devastating as far as being able to take things out.
Yeah, crazy. You've had some unbelievable experiences, John. Don't even know what to ask you next. Let me look at my notes. You were on that second deployment, though, April 72 until March 73?
Yes.
That's almost a year.
It was. At the time, and it may still even be today, it was the longest combat cruise of the Navy.
And not an uneventful one, right? Because we've had, I want to say it was your air wing, but wasn't Fingers and some of those guys, like May of 72, there was a lot of air-to-air combat going on.
Oh, yeah.
And was Willie Driscoll and Duke Cunningham, was that also on Midway, or was that a different ship?
That was a different ship.
Okay. But around that time as well, I think they got 3, 4, and 5 in one day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, our sister squadron, which we shared a door between the fighter squadron and us, the attack squadron. There was 2 fighter squadrons aboard the ship, 1 A-6 squadrons and 2 A-7 squadrons. But we shared the door with Muggs and his crew. That guy was an animal. Just absolutely. He was fearless. He would take MiGs out. I want to say he got 3 MiGs that second cruise that I remember, at least, with the F-4.
Wow. Sharing a door, I mean, right, there's some great stories of some of the, I don't know what to call it, but you had a common enemy, at least it sounds like on this deployment, but was there still a lot of ribbing between the fighter and the attack guys?
Oh, yeah, all the time,
Didn't matter what was happening over the beach?
Didn't matter what was happening. We used to, they'd come back and said, did you see the front page of the Stars and Stripes? We're on the front page. And they were. I mean, the big deal is shoot a MiG down, you're on the front page of the Navy Stars and Stripes. And we used to say, yeah, you guys, you make the headlines. The attack pilots make the history.
Yeah, I figured that's where you were going. Oh, dear. Wow. You talked about bringing pretty much everybody home your first deployment. Was that the case second deployment?
No, it was not the case.
We don't have to go there if it's... Did you get to see any of them at least later? That might be a little happier.
Yeah, I can tell you about the second deployment. We lost the first BN that we lost was basically we lost them on the ship. An A-6 came back, and they had been hit with AAA. The A-6 landed. The main mount came off, lost his main mount tire, spun through the pack. The BN was ejected by a wing or the tail of an F-4. So he was lost at sea. And I want to say on the ship We lost 4 or 5 sailors because of that. There was a fire on the flight deck. We lost one of our other squadron mates on a night mission due to a small arms fire, 50 caliber. They brought him, the BN got hit. They brought him back onto the ship.
Like the movie.
Yeah.
Crazy. But to put this in perspective for those who haven't been in a squadron, maybe they've played sports, maybe in college or high school or wherever. Here's somebody on your team. You see them every day. You practice. You play games together. One day they're gone. And not just passed in their sleep, but horribly.
Horribly.
Graphically. Yikes. Other squadrons as well, right?
Yeah. Every one of us in that second cruise lost somebody. Either, we lost somebody.
Yeah.
Everyone. Our squadron we originally went out with 12 A-6, 12 bombers, and 4 tankers. And so we got to alternate flying bombers and the tankers. Typically, you'd have 1 attack mission and 1 tanker mission a day. And Dave and I ended up having a daylight tanker mission, and we were just out tooling around. We gave everybody our fuel. We still had some left. We got a call. One of our A-7s had been hit and had to eject right close to the beach of Vietnam. And Dave and I were up at 35,000 feet, just tooling around, just, shooting a breeze until it was our chance to land. But as soon as we heard that, we took over SAR Command, and the tanker had 2 radios in it, which was convenient. I was talking to the ship. Dave was talking to the other A-7s in the area and F-4s to make sure we had this pilot pinpointed so we could bring in the helo. And I'm talking to the ship saying, launch the SAR. And so we coordinated that. And the cycles that we were on, we were going to land, but there was a cycle in front of us that was going to take off. They were downwind. And as soon as the A-7s came out there and relieved us and took over the SAR command, we turned around and went back to the ship. But I remember calling up Schoolboy. I said, need a straight-in, immediate landing. We landed with 500 pounds of fuel.
Which is like gauge error, probably.
Yeah.
Wow. Who was Schoolboy? Was that the...
Midway. That was Midway's call sign. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Schoolboy.
Oh, funny. Where I thought maybe you were going to go with that story was that the A-7 was in need of the tanker and you met him right offshore, because I think there was some stories, maybe not an A-7, but there were stories of tanker pilots going close to feet dry to help get people out because they're either dripping fuel or shot up so badly or whatever. But it's just right. You do what you got to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
Because tomorrow could be you, and you want everyone to drop what they're doing and come save you.
I'll tell you a story about our XO or CO at the time. He was one of those guys, today. He'd be one of those guys, if he'd call up and say, I got a mission to hell, I'd say, the line starts behind me, sir. I'm there. But we had Air Force exchange pilots that came aboard the ship, and they would fly non-combat. And I remember the skipper had an Air Force pilot in the tanker. And it's like you're talking about. They were up north on an Alpha strike, and there was a plane that was shot up and needed fuel. The XL says, we're going to go in and give them some fuel. And the Air Force guy says, we can't do that. You're not allowed to go feet dry. And he says, watch me. Watch me. So, I mean, those are real stories. I mean, that actually happened in our,
Wow.
in our squadron.
Stephen Kuntz has written a book about the Dragon's Jaw, the Thanhua Bridge, if I'm pronouncing it hopefully correctly. I haven't read it. I don't know that much about it. I do know we've sent a lot of aircraft against it, a lot of ordnance, and it took forever. I think maybe you can help shed some light on it. Some of the aircraft we sent didn't come back. What was your part in trying to take down that bridge?
Dave and I tried to take it. And
you were just one of the many?
One of the many that tried to take it down. It wasn't until late in 1972 that it was taken down by one of our sister ships with a laser-guided bomb.
And was it just that it was such a sturdy bridge it needed that direct hit, or just...
It was a sturdy bridge, but it also was a heavily defended bridge. I mean, we lost so many airplanes trying to take that sucker down. It was right on Highway 1 coming on down the coast from North Vietnam. Notorious. It's a notorious bridge.
It was the nemesis.
It was.
Wow. Well, we talked about that. We talked about Kep Airfield. I'm sure we could go for a long time. I do want to circle back, though, to where were you or what were you doing in February and March of 73? We didn't get them all back in one fell swoop, but when the boys started coming home, well, first off, you flew your last combat mission, I think, in early February?
Yeah.
Okay. And then does the ship sort of pull back and go down to the Philippines to regroup? Or because in those days, you didn't keep everything on board like I did in all 5 of my deployments. You might go to the Philippines, offload either people or parts or spares or whatever. So at the end of the war, are you going down there to sort of regroup a little bit, or?
We were just there in a holding pattern.
Just to see if it was going to, in fact,
stay
peaceful?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you want me to talk about the last A-6 that was lost, I can do that.
Was it from your squadron?
Yes.
Sure.
It was my pilot's roommate.
Wow.
And the BN was just down the hall from bunk room 8, which to this day is the notorious bunk room on the Midway.
Even as a museum now?
They're starting to open that bunk room up.
Wow.
But I talked to crews that were on the Midway after we were, and they said, yeah, it was as notorious as you folks were.
Because people who lived in it?
Just because of the people that lived in it. The first cruise that we had, which the ship came out of overhaul, all NFOs, bombardier navigators of the A-6 squadron were assigned to it. There's 8 of us.
Okay.
It's like, okay, we didn't ask for it. We just end up having to be assigned to it. But it became the party room on the ship. It was the best stocked liquor store in the Pacific.
Unofficially.
Unofficially.
Yeah.
And the second cruise, we all got together again and said, we're going back in that bunk room. And the ship said, no, you can't. You're too senior to be in there. And we said, we don't care. Al's room was just down the way. After Linebacker II, the B-52s were still bombing up in North Vietnam. The A-6s were assigned missile suppression on the missile sites. I mean, that was crazy because the missile sites could be anywhere. January, the weather typically over there was overcast. They went in on a missile suppression mission and didn't come back. What we heard on the guard channel, or what the other airplanes heard in the guard channel, was air beeper come up voice. And so we knew an airplane had gone down. At that time, Dave and I weren't flying together because they were bringing new crews on, so they wanted to
share the experience.
And it was, we knew we were going home soon because peace treaty had been signed, POWs were getting set. Dave was flying a tanker mission, if I remember right, that morning or that evening when we heard that the airplane went down, and we went to ops and said, we're going back together. Load us up with as many rock eyes as you guys have available. We're taking them. Skipper said he wasn't too happy about us going together because he says, I'm not going to lose another crew.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Dave going to the front of the ready room and basically telling the skipper and ops officer, we're going. I went to the back of the ready room and I told maintenance, I said, give me the best airplane you have and load as many rock eyes as you can put on it.
Were you looking for vengeance or maybe survivors? Or
No,
what?
we were looking for survivors.
Okay.
We went in. We were going for survivors. We knew that before they had gone down, if there was any North Vietnamese, we were going to have to clear the area before the Gila would come in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget. Air beeper, come up voice. I never heard a thing. That was the hardest day. Hardest day in my career.
What did that mean? Were they alive on the ground and then dispatched by the enemy?
If they would have come up voice, we knew that they'd have been alive. Because in the A-6, when the ejection seat went off, the beeper went off with it, and you could pinpoint them. But by the time we got there, it was overcast. It was completely overcast. We were between layers. We knew we shouldn't have been, but to hell with the rules. We're going to go look for them.
Yeah.
And they never came up voice, and we were low on fuel. So we came back.
As I understand, they weren't lost forever. What was the end of this story? It took a couple decades, but...
Took a couple decades. 2004. They were found. They were interned. Arlington National Cemetery on the anniversary.
Was it determined that they were killed in the crash, or was it a surface-air missile? I mean...
We don't know.
Okay.
To this day, we don't know.
They were killed in combat.
They were killed in combat. They're in a common grave.
Yeah. And these are friends of yours. So it hits close to the heart.
It does.
Yeah.
But as an outcome of that, the BN's son, who never saw his dad, is now a general in the Air Force in an air wing in Italy.
Wow.
And he was always been part of the squadron.
Yeah, I can imagine. But never met his dad. My goodness. War is awful. John, I got a couple listener questions, which will hopefully cheer us both up a little bit, but also then we can wrap up and get you back to your reunion. I can see why there is an A-6 Intruder Association and reunions, I think you said semi-annually, because you don't go through something like this and come out without... It changes you, I got to think. Now, I don't know if Dave is still with us.
Dave passed away 10 years ago due to brain cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But let me ask, how was your relationship with Dave from 1973 to 10 years ago?
Oh, we stayed together.
Yeah.
I mean, when the Gulf War first started, I was in an airplane in Portland, Oregon, flying home. As soon as I touched the ground, I called up Dave. I says, thanks. Thanks for bringing me back home. The squadron stayed together since 2004. That was like a reunion for us. Mm-hmm. We stay together, including our plane captains. Believe it or not, our plane captains are here this week to celebrate this reunion with us. I've never been in a group of men that have stayed together and have such a close bond.
Those shared tribulations have created bonds that, right? I mean,
right.
That's not normal.
No,
it's not normal. You've been through some hellacious
Some of those men I know better than I know my own brothers.
Yeah. John, I told some folks that help support the show on a system called Patreon that we were going to sit down. I've got 3 questions I want to throw at you, and if they're quick, so be it. Scott Morris wants to know, did you fly Iron Hand missions? And if so, what was the difference flying the A-6B? You said you flew SAM suppression, but was that the same thing as what Scott's asking about here?
No, it's not the same thing.
Okay.
Our squadron did not have any A-6Bs with the Shrike on them, which was a missile that would seek the Fanzone radar.
Okay. So that wasn't your...
That wasn't part of our mission.
Okay. Then let's move on to a question from Joe Kunzler, who lives up near you in the Pacific Northwest. He says, take us through a bomb run dropping Mark 84s. I guess mostly we talked about Mark 82s today. Did you ever end up dropping the 2,000-pound general purpose bomb?
Just once.
In combat or in training?
No, in combat.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember how many we put on that airplane, but I do remember it. And it was down in South Vietnam to clear the forest. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's the only reason we dropped
like a daisy
them.
cutter type of thing? Huh.
Yeah, because we had both nose fuses and tail fuses on them So we could do that. And the object was to explode them on top of the jungle canopy.
Clear a landing zone or something, maybe?
Whatever
was needed.
Whatever the crazy Air Force wanted. But once is the only time I ever remember doing that.
Well, but speaking of that, you talked earlier about what finally dropped the bridge was some of the new technology coming at the end of the war. Did that come to VA-115 or?
No, VA-115 did not have. We had what they called the A-6A. That was basically the Grumman Iron Works bomber.
Yeah. I love Jevon's question, John. What do you most attribute your survival in the skies over North Vietnam to? I might be tempted to say Dave.
Well, yeah.
You've certainly sung his praises today.
No, Dave, absolutely Dave. I put him up against any A-6 pilot that's walked the face of the earth.
You said earlier, best you knew.
Yeah, best I knew. I mean, even our XO was in that same class. But, the two of them together, probably the best A-6 pilots I've ever seen, because they were calm, they were accurate, they knew what that airplane could do. I think for Dave and I was knowing what each other was going to do. We didn't have to ask each other, to do anything. It was, we knew exactly what was going on. I mean, on a bomb run, I'd say, Master Arm, and I'd tell him what bombs we had. I says, you ready to go? And he didn't have to ask me that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was our training that we had together. And then it was a mission planning. We planned every single mission that we had together. It wasn't me planning it. It was us planning it. So there was no doubt in our mind when we got up in the air where we were going to go and what we were going to see.
Mm-hmm.
Just the experience that we had. We knew exactly what we were going to do. Just, like I told you, that SAR mission, there was no doubt in our mind what he was going to do and what I was going to do. And it was like, ask each other, are we going to do this? It was, no, we are going to do this. Because we got people in harm's way and they're going to come back with us.
I have to think there's almost a letdown, and I've read about this for troops on the ground. When they get back from a combat zone, it's almost like they can't adjust because there's that level of high that they almost crave now. Some of them find their way into other things, unfortunately, which aren't as healthy. But I have to think to have that sort of arrangement or relationship, even, if I may call it that, it has to really just be unique. I mean, I don't think you find that really anywhere else, even in a marriage. But, business partner, team, clubs, maybe the association like we talked about, but that's got to be unique, I would think, in your experience.
That relationship that Dave and I had is unique. Matter of fact, a relationship of his wife. I mean, the wives is there too.
Yeah.
And I called Deanne several times a year just to see what's going on, see if I need the help. But I've come down to L.A. area. She still lives in the same house that they have. And I says, Deanne, do you have a honey-do list?
Because I can help.
Yeah. And I had the opportunity to meet one of the sons up at Whidbey Island when we had a dedication of the A-6 tribute there at the base. And, I mean, they're family. It's family. VA-115 is, I can put it this way, VA-115 Arabs are family.
Yeah, good stuff. John, you, as I understand, when you left that deployment, did not stick around in the Navy? Did you move on to other things, or what did you do?
When I saw the POWs get off the airplane at Clark Air Force Base, my AT chief and I walked off the Midway, saluted the ensign, came home.
That was it?
That was it.
I'm out.
Yeah.
What did you go on to?
I went back to my engineering.
Really? Civil, right?
I'm a civil engineer, still working part-time today.
Really?
Still working part-time today. I go around and do water and wastewater treatment plants. Matter of fact, I'm working on a plant up in Orange County. I've worked on plants down
Don't
here.
they recycle their wastewater up there and end up re-drinking it, don't they?
They do, but they have to have fairly sophisticated
Yeah.
pieces of equipment to be
Well,
able to do that.
We'll spend the next 2 hours on that some other time. But, well, I mean, gosh, I guess you probably enjoy the work enough that if you don't call it work, right? I mean, if you're still doing it, you must either enjoy it or need to do it. And I don't want to ask you that part of it.
No, I don't need to do it. I just, I enjoy it. I don't have a boss. I don't do timesheets. I don't do expense accounts. I just call people up and, and I work when I feel like it.
Yeah.
Like this week, I'm off. Last week, I worked a few hours. Next week, I don't know if I'll work at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're off this week because it allowed us to get back or get together. For me, it's between trips. I'm back to my airline gig, and you're in town for the reunion. And so here we are, able to sit down and have some really serious conversations, John. I mean, it's, I guess, not amazing, but it's so, dare I say, touching that, here it's been 50 years, right? At least 70 to 20. And it's still right there. It still grips you.
It does. It's part of my
existence.
Part of my core of my being.
Yeah. Well, I might have to come be a fly on the wall at some of your gatherings at the reunion because I got to think I'm going to see a lot of hugs and probably a few tears and a few drinks and some great stories, I'm sure. And I'm glad we were able to get some here today, John. This has been fun. And Warren, if you're out there, good job. Thank you getting us together. He suggested it. And I suppose I didn't read all your accolades, but we're not necessarily here for, the specifications of an A-6 and your records either, but a couple DFCs in your experiences with all those missions, and so you're part of that society as well?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good. John, just have one final question. It's a tradition here on the Fighter Pilot Podcast that we always ask about call signs. So, John Cook, I think you said if we were in the Northeast, they'd pronounce it Koch. Okay.
Yes.
It's not spelled C-O-O-K. It's spelled K-O-C-H. But Shylock, that's an interesting one. But actually, help me with this. I thought I'd heard that in those days, the call signs were a bit of a fighter pilot, those guys in the other room on the other side of the door thing. But did the A-6 folks start getting them, or did that come along later? Or
no, the A-6, our second cruise.
Okay.
The JOs got together and said we need to have call signs. The fighter pilots across the door had call signs.
But also, I had heard because if you use it on the radio, it helps mask identity because the Vietnamese were listening.
Oh, I swear. Dave, my picture is in somebody's wall in the missile container that says Yankee
Get
War
this guy.
Pirate. Yeah. Yeah. Shylock transpired from my storekeeper when the skipper asked me to be the supply officer.
Okay.
I ended up being able to know and get acquainted with every single supply officer up and down the West Coast. Sink pack fleet. I used to know him. I used to be able to call him on the phone. I'll never forget Dave said, he said, "You are a chief in officer's clothing," because I knew where everything was.
And that's a compliment, by the way, because chiefs are the ones getting it done.
But, the skipper had, when we checked into the squadron, he had a laundry list of things that he wanted. He needed a 16-millimeter projection for the ready room. He needed airweight 38 survival weapons. He wanted Air Force flight jackets. I forget what other things. And I was able to get all those things for him. But I think the one thing that Dave nailed that Shylock call sign was, we were in QB Point, the beginning of our second cruise, and the A-6 wings fold. And at the wing root where the fold is, there's a big hinge. It's a triangular type piece of solid steel that holds the wing from falling off.
Grumman Ironworks.
Grumman Ironworks, you bet.
Yeah.
And you go out and you check every pre-flight. You pre-flight it, make sure that thing is not cracked, because it would cracked. We were in QB Point coming out to the ship. There was, I think, 3 or 4 of us that were going to fly back onto the ship from a week of R&R in the Philippines. And I noticed that it was cracked. And we just had a we didn't have any crew there, line crew there, just folks to fuel us up. And we called up the ship. And Dave's got a hold of the ship and let them know that we weren't coming back. We got a call back, and the skipper said, of the squadron says, no uncertain terms, that aircraft's got to be here because we're going on a line period.
Meaning a period of operations.
A period of flight operation.
Continuous combat.
Yeah. And this was on Sunday.
Okay.
I knew this base supply officer at Subic Bay. I called him up, and I said, do you have this part? And he got his computer and went through his list. He said, no, we don't have it. I said, do you mind if I come on over and we take a look and see if there's there? Well, in the meantime, Dave has commandeered a pickup truck and an empty 500-gallon fuel tank and is draining the outboard wing into that fuel tank so we can fold it. I'm over there, went to supply depot, walked through the supply depot. I says, there it is right there. Picked it up, got back to the airfield. Dave and I had commandeered a couple tools out of the line shack. We replaced the A-frame, folded the wings, and came back to the ship.
John, I might be slow, so bear with me here. I'm not quite sure, though, I'm making a connection. Should I understand what the word Shylock means? Maybe I don't.
I was able to find anything there was in the Navy.
Okay.
Anything you wanted, I could find.
Good stuff. Probably it's just one of those words I don't have enough.
It comes from Shakespearean play. That's how Snake
See,
put
there
it
you
on.
go. Okay,
That's
I was a math major, so.
Yeah, well, I was an engineering major.
Yeah, that's right.
But Snake gave me that, and he said, you're Shylock.
There you go.
He says, you can find anything there is.
And he was Snake. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, John, this has been amazing. Thank you for your time, and I don't know what else to ask you because we've been all over the map with emotions here on the roller coaster of the highs and the lows and your history and everything else. But I guess I'll give you a chance if there's anything else you wished I'd asked you or anything else you want to add for today's discussion.
As I talk to my children, grandchildren, other squadron mates, things come up. I mean, you got to understand what we experienced during Vietnam was suppressed until 2004 is the first time I opened up about what I did or what any of us did.
Yeah. Is that because in 2004 is when that last crew was brought home?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, my dad in World War II never talked about his experience in World War II. I mean, he took it to the grave with him. For me, it was 40 years. Those experiences impact your soul so deeply.
Clearly.
That they get suppressed. I mean, even the flying that we did, we flew from day to day. What happened yesterday is gone. It's done. We didn't think about it. Because if we did, we wouldn't probably fly today.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a macho thing that we're supposed to not tell these stories, but obviously as the purveyor of a military aviation themed podcast, I'm glad you did. And I hope that those who watch or listen, and especially your family members that you said are going to be waiting for this to air, which I expect could be in June of 2024, we'll see. But I hope they appreciate it too. But I certainly deeply do, John. So thanks again so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure being here. And it just helps me also get my feelings out and get grounded. It's difficult, but it helps. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I still do every episode. Now, as a quick reminder, we try to explain all the jargon, but in case you missed something, head on over to fighterpilotpodcast.com where we have a glossary of all the different terms we use. And while you're there, check out some of the cool merchandise that we offer. For additional content and to help support the show, please go check out our Patreon page. We'll see you next week.